We looked at male dominance in a different segment, and now we're going to look at the other component of sexual selection, female choice of mate. So, if we look at eggs and sperm are cheap. Guys produce a lot of sperm, but eggs are costly. Females do not produce nearly as many eggs as males produce sperm. So it pays for females to be very choosy in terms of who they're going to end up mating with. So what are females attracted to? Well, I think, as we probably know by now from other segments, the most conspicuous males, where we have cases of extreme sexual dimorphism like we see here, because they tend to be the best providers of resources, they tend to be healthier, better fathers, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, the more colorful males. So how do you know that having striking colors on a male did evolve by sexual selection? Well, typically there are some characteristics that go along with the males that are brightly colored, where we know that females are in fact choosing to mate with the most colorful ones, meaning sexual selection. And these characteristics are that they're used solely for reproductive success. I mean, that's sexual selection right there. They can't have any other function. They can't help you find more food or anything like that. And you only see them in males that court in the daytime. In other words, when there's daylight, colors don't show up at night. And they tend to court in a direction facing the female, such that the colors, the most colorful part, is something that is going to be particularly conspicuous to the female. I mean, if it's the head that's colorful, the male's not going to face away from the female while courting her. And of course, the location on the body of the males where the colors are found, so that they're not obscured by quick movement, for example. I mean, if you look at the wings of hummingbirds, there's hardly any color on the wings, because they move so quickly, it would be hard for a female to even notice the colors. So no, you see the colors on the body, all the iridescent plumage on the body, but, not that much on the wings. So let's look at some more examples of sexual selection. This is a long-tailed widow bird, and these guys are found in Africa. You can see the striking differences between the male on the left and the female on the right, who doesn't even have a long tail. So that long tail, by the way, is a bit of a handicap when you think about it, because although they can fly, they can't fly as well as a male that doesn't have to carry that around with him all over the place. There's a risk of predation if he can't get high off the ground, and they have trouble with that. Some terrestrial predator could reach up and grab him. So why would that have evolved? And of course, why only in the male? That's another thing. So the only reason for that is that females must love these traits, the colors and the long tail, especially the long tail. So here we have a normal long-tailed widow bird. A field experiment was done to test whether or not the long tail actually mattered in terms of female choice. So they took a scissors, they captured some of these birds in the field. They left some of them normal. They didn't do anything to them other than capture them to control for being handled by humans. And they created short-tailed widow birds. So there's our second group. And they had all these feathers laying around. So what they did was take super glue and glue them onto the already long tails of the normal males to create a super long-tailed widow bird. And if that tail is something that the females are keyed in on in terms of choosing a mate, then what you would expect to happen is they should prefer the elongated males even over the normal males, and they shouldn't like the shortened tail guys at all. So they turned these guys back out into the field on their respective territories, and they just measured the effective nesting success. Who's getting chosen by females? What's the reproductive fitness? So the results are exactly as you would predict. The females chose the elongated males over the normal males, and to some extent the normal males over the shortened males. So yes, these tails have evolved by sexual selection. That's the trait that the females are particularly keyed in on. Lions, okay, we don't tend to think of lions as sexually dimorphic very much in terms of the striking color aspect, even though they are sexually dimorphic. The males look different than the females. The males have manes and the females don't. But not all manes are the same. So we have some lighter colored manes that are shorter haired males, shorter maned males, and these males tend to be submissive. The darker manes are longer in terms of the fur, and these tend to be characteristic of dominant males. So there we have a dark, long-maned male up on top, and one of the lighter ones down on the bottom. You can see the difference between these two males. So it turns out these dark, long-maned males do have higher testosterone levels and have a longer reproductive lifespan, probably linked in with the higher testosterone level, and higher offspring survival as well. So those guys are doing very well. However, you got to think about this as being somewhat costly as well, having these dark, long manes living in Africa where it's already hot year-round. So they're subject to thermal stress. I mean, when you look at the heat production of these guys, they are really, really stressed out thermally relative to the short-maned males. And the thermal stress is associated with abnormal sperm. So even though, they have high offspring survival and all this other good stuff, a lot of their sperm tends to be abnormal. And they have a lower food intake because they're just so hot. Who likes to eat if you're sweating, right? So the idea here is, oh my gosh, to be that successful, despite this thermal stress, they must really be great guys, super studs, in order to cope with all of these costs. So basically, you can look at this in terms of a cost-benefit relationship, where you have to weigh one against the other. Well, there is an ethological principle that actually deals with this, and it's called the handicap principle. And basically, it's what I had just said in the previous screen, that if you have such incredible costs associated with certain traits, you must really be able to compensate for that big time in order to overcome those costs and be as successful as you are. In this case, as successful as they are in terms of their success with females and rearing offspring. So despite the handicap of the thermal stress, they're doing very, very well, the handicap principle. This is a lazuli bunting, a male. This is an example of something called disruptive selection. It's somewhat different than sexual selection. So with sexual selection, the female is going to choose to mate with the most brightly colored males. So the guys way over at that right end of this normal curve are the ones the female should like, and not the ones in the middle, and certainly not the ones at the opposite end on the left-hand side. But the thing about disruptive selection, and why you don't see it very much in nature, is what's going on there is the extremes are favored at the expense of the intermediates. So the females will mate with the most brightly colored males and the least brightly colored males, not the guys in the middle that are intermediate in color between those two extremes. So that's what we see in lazuli buntings. So here we have a brightly colored adult male. The yearling males, which are capable of successful reproduction, come in three varieties. Some are very bright, like the adult males, some are intermediate, and some are dull. So I think you can see how this fits in nicely with where I'm heading with disruptive selection. So there's our dull guys over at the left-hand side. There's our bright guys over on the right-hand side, and these intermediates in the middle. These are all yearling males capable of reproducing. There's our adult male. So what's the adult male's relationship going to be with these types of yearling males? Well, turns out that those bright guys can successfully compete with the adult males in terms of females. So they're holding their own against these adult males. The adult males don't bother these dull guys. Now, some people have suggested, there's no data here, we can't put ourselves in the head of the adult male, but some people think, well, maybe he thinks it's a female because it's not brightly colored at all and either are females. So maybe, maybe not. We just don't know. But they don't really aggress toward those guys. But they do toward those intermediate guys. They'll go after those guys. So they're selected against by these adult males. What about the female? What does she do? Well, the bright males, the yearling males, are mating often with these females. Sometimes she'll mate with the dull males, but never with the intermediate ones. So they're selected against from both standpoints, from the standpoint of the females as well as the males. So disruptive selection, big time. So now you might want to ask, well, okay, so clearly they are selected against, but then why mate with the dull guys? Why not only the bright guys? And the answer for that comes down to this. It has to do with fitness. More of her eggs will hatch if she's mating with two males rather than just one. And since those dull guys are being tolerated by the males, they're fine, they're around, they're not being chased away, she'll mate with them. And also a bright male, but not an intermediate male, because those guys are being aggressed upon by the males, by the adult males. So, yeah, it has to do with admixture of genes and probably different levels of sperm and things like that lead to greater hatching success if she's reproducing, copulating with two males as opposed to only one. A male and a female crested auklet. And now you're probably thinking, there's no sexual dimorphism. And you're right, there isn't. Then how could there possibly be sexual selection? Guess what? There is. In both sexes. So it all has to do with the length of those crests. Each sex prefers the longer crests. In other words, the males prefer to court the females with the longer crests rather than the shorter crests. And in turn, the females prefer to actually choose to mate with the males with the longer crests rather than the shorter crests. So it's sexual selection in both sexes. It's very unusual. Now here we have a reversal. Here we have females that are brightly colored and males that are not. So actually, this is male choice, not female choice. These are found in gobies, the two-spotted gobies. So the breeding females have these brighter yellow-orange bellies. And that's a male on the bottom, by the way. So some people did an aquarium experiment where all they had to do, pretty simple, was to alter the belly color of the females and then watch to see what the males did. And so this is a simulation. I actually photoshopped those colors there. But you can see there's one that doesn't have much color and one that has a lot of color. And there's a male. And in the experiments that were done, the males preferred to mate with the colorful females and not with the ones that had less color. So total role reversal, but it's one of those cases where the female happens to be more colorful than the male, and therefore the male is choosing who to mate with. Now, here are some examples of sexual dimorphism that have nothing to do with sexual selection. So with sexual selection, you typically have sexual dimorphism, not the crested auklet, but in most cases you do. But now, sexual dimorphism does not necessarily always mean sexual selection. So that's what we're looking at here. Sexual dimorphism of traits that have nothing to do with female choice or male choice if it was sex role reverse. So here we have a male and a female huia. These guys, by the way, have gone extinct. But notice the difference in the shape of the bills. And the reason for that is that they would not end up eating the same types of food. The shape of the bills influenced the kind of food they ate, so they weren't competing against one another for limited food resources. Sexual dimorphism in the bills but had nothing to do with sexual selection. The females were not using anything having to do with the bill in terms of choosing her mate. And we see something very similar in the purple-throated carib, very closely related to the hummingbird. So the male's bill is a bit shorter and a little bit less curved than the female's, which is longer and a little bit more curved. And it's the same basic reason as we saw in the huia. This dimorphism of the bills enables them to feed on different types of heliconia flowers. So they're not competing for the exact same resources. So here's a case of sexual dimorphism related to beak weaponry. That's a male long-billed hummingbird. Long bill comes to a sharp point. And you can see there's a female bill up on top and a male bill down on the bottom. You can't really see the size difference of the male and female bill in this particular photo, but you can see that the male bill comes to a sharper point than the female. And it's just that the males use the sharp point as weaponry. Females are oblivious to that in terms of mate choice. Here we have two males going at it against one another. So they'll actually stab one another with this if they can. There's a normal speed with this male. And another male comes in. This is slowed down 8 times. Get a better view of what's about to happen. And it's still hard to see. These guys are so fast. But getting stabbed a little bit right there. And there, another one. So they use them as weapons. Females are not keyed in on that in terms of choice of mate. So that's sexual selection. We saw male dominance in a different segment, and in this one, female choice.